Many British aircraft manufacturers got into a spot of trouble after the Great War. Amongst them was the Sopwith Company, which had been responsible for the most famous British aircraft of that conflict. In the exodus that followed Sopwith's disintegration in late 1920, a designer called Herbert Smith was offered a job with the Mitsubishi internal combustion engine company of Nagoya, Japan. Smith wasn't just any designer. He had joined Sopwith as a draftsman, but soon been promoted to chief engineer. In that capacity, he designed the Pup, the Triplane, and the Camel. He was just 31 when he headed to Japan, and it was fair to say that he knew what he was doing. His first project was the Type 10 Naval Fighter. Troublingly for those of us looking at Japanese aircraft from a century's distance, there are in fact three Type 10s: the fighter, the reconnaissance aircraft, and the torpedo bomber. 1921 was the 10th year of the Taisho Emperor, so everything was Type 10 in 1921. The Type 10, or the 1MF as it's generally referred to, was a classic Sopwith fighter. It had a conventional wooden structure with cloth-covered skin. Firepower came from two 303 Vickers machine guns. The engine was a 280 horsepower Mitsubishi High, otherwise known as a license-built water-cooled Hispano-Suiza V8. It drove a two-bladed wooden propeller. Span of the larger top plane of the single-bay wings was 30 feet and 6 inches, and the fuselage was 22 feet long. It therefore was 2 feet longer and had a foot shorter wingspan than a contemporary Sopwith Snipe. Larger size meant that the Type 10 was also 400 pounds heavier than the Snipe. The first prototype was completed in October 1921, and it had a honeycomb radiator in front of the engine. That gives it the flat nose look that was only retained in the first production aircraft, after which the type converted to Lamblin radiators, for which Mitsubishi bought the license in 1923. The Lamblin was a cylinder radiator that was suspended below the fuselage, with pipes going back up to the engine. The revised Type 10 had two of these radiators. The prototype was a typically good fighter. It could hit 147 miles an hour, and it had 2.5 hours of endurance. To enable carrier landings, the Type 10 was equipped with claws mounted on the wheel axles and designed to grab the arresting wires on the carrier hosho. The wires were the British style for the period, running from the bow to the stern. The idea behind this was that the wires would guide the aircraft when landing and prevent it from steering off course. Additional wires were also stretched across the deck to help stop the plane. The bow to stern wire arrangement wasn't very reliable, and it was soon deleted. The first takeoff and landing on the Hosho, which was Japan's first purpose-built aircraft carrier, was made on February 28, 1923 by William Jordan, who was a member of Herbert Smith's team. For this achievement, Jordan earned 10,000 yen, which is about $80,000 in today's money. A month later, Shinichi Kira became the first Japanese aviator to land on the carrier. Jordan is often written out of history. The next version, the 1MF3, converted over to the Lamblin radiator and thus had a more streamlined nose. 1MF3 was actually a bit slower than the prototype, despite also being marginally lighter. Top speed was now 132 miles an hour. Radical changes were then made for the 1MF4 subtype by moving the cockpit forward and changing the wing stagger to compensate for the weight shift. The final subtype was the 1MF5, which had further minor changes. There was also a 1MF5A, which was a trainer with enlarged wing area for safer carrier landings. These were equipped with floats beneath each wing and jettisonable undercarriage in case of emergency landing on water. In all, 138 MF3, 4 and 5 aircraft were delivered by Mitsubishi before production ended in 1928. After this, some of the remaining machines were later retrofitted to the MF5A trainer standard to support newer types. With so many of them available, the tough, agile 1MF was fundamental in establishing fighter tactics in the Imperial Japanese Navy. In addition to Hosho, the larger Akagi and Kaga also went into service with Type 10s as their main fighter when they were commissioned in 1927 and 1928. New carrier pilots first trained on land, using a simple landing strip that had been set up to be the same size as the carrier deck. They'd also practiced short takeoffs before moving on to Hosho, which remained a training carrier for all of its service life. It was instrumental in forming the skills of hundreds of future officers, airmen, and aces. Many squadron leaders and officers in World War II started in the 1920s on the 1MF. Since Japan was not at war during this period, the 1MF was never actually used operationally, though. It's interesting to compare the 1MF to the most relevant contemporary carrier fighter, the Royal Navy's Fairey Flycatcher. The 1MF3 could hit 132 miles an hour, it had a service ceiling of 23,000 feet and endurance of 2.5 hours. The Flycatcher had the same top speed, give or take a mile an hour or so. The essentially academic service ceiling was 19,000 feet and its endurance was marginally superior at about 3 hours. Despite the Flycatcher having about 20% better power to mass, climb to altitude was essentially the same, which isn't bad for a first attempt, although having one of the best aircraft designers in the world on staff probably helped. Smith's excellent design established Mitsubishi's status as the leading domestic manufacturer of carrier fighters. After his departure, and actually his retirement from aircraft design, Herbert Smith's apprentice, Shoji Hattori, went on to design the Mitsubishi Taka, the first carrier fighter designed by a Japanese person. It was unsuccessful in the competition to replace the Type 10, losing out to the Nakajima Type 3 carrier fighter, which was a license-built Gloucester Gambit. Even so, the line through the A5M to the legendary Zero had begun. In the interim, Mitsubishi's Type 13 and Type 89 attack aircraft would fly from IJA and carrier decks, continuing the process of preparing their aviators for war.